I just want to be sure that I am live on YouTube. Once I am sure, we will get into the topic. Yes, so I am live on YouTube. In today's video, we will talk about the tariffs that the American President Donald J. Trump recently introduced and has now paused. As things stand now, the last time I checked this news, there is a 90 days pause when the tariffs that were introduced by the United States of America on many countries, including India, have been paused, and the only tariffs that are still in place are the ones that were placed on China. In fact, tariffs on China has now been increased to 125%. That is the People's Republic of China. Every other country is now at a base tariff of 10%. What does all this mean? Before we get into it, I want to mention the exact rate of tariffs that was introduced on different countries by the United States of America. This is called the discounted reciprocal tariffs. How they were calculated, nobody can say for certain, but people in the media have made assumptions, and the theory that I have heard, which seems most believable to me and perhaps is the right theory, is that the American government calculated, some say miscalculated, but calculated the trade deficit that America has with a country. Say the trade deficit with a country like India. What is trade deficit? Trade deficit is how much am I importing from a country and how much am I exporting to the country. Is that same? If the import and export from and to a country, import from a country and export to a country is same, then there is no trade deficit, there is no trade surplus, it's zero, it's balanced. But if I am importing goods worth $100 and I am exporting no goods, I am exporting nothing, then the trade deficit is $100. So that trade deficit of $100 is then getting divided by 2, and the half of whatever percentage is coming to it. If it's a 100% trade deficit, then you have 50% tariff. That's roughly the argument that I've heard. So whatever the trade deficit is, that is divided by the import. So America is importing $100 worth of goods from India, not exporting anything. So 100 divided by 100, that's 1 into 100, that's 100%. Divide that by 2, 50% would be the tariff imposed on India. That is not the case. India was a tariff of 26% was imposed on India, which now has been put on hold for 90 days. The last time I checked, because I keep saying last time I checked because the policies keep changing based on the social media posts of the American President Donald J. Trump. So we'll go through the list one by one as it was declared on Liberation Day, that is 2nd April 2025. This has been revised, but we will discuss this first and then we'll discuss how it was revised. We will discuss what tariffs mean, and we will discuss how different people describing tariffs on YouTube are largely describing it as they view it through their own political lens, how different people on different sides of the political aisle as well as different sides of the geopolitical aisle are claiming to achieve or trying to achieve through this scenario, what the Republicans are trying to achieve, what the Democrats are trying to achieve, what the Americans are trying to achieve, what the Chinese are trying to achieve. We'll try to discuss that as well, and hopefully it will be an engaging video. If not, it will definitely induce a good night's sleep. So try to hang on, I suppose. And so let's start with the list. It starts with the People's Republic of China, where the reciprocal tariffs imposed was originally 34%. Now it is 125%. European Union got 20% tariffs. Vietnam got 46%. Now, Vietnam is one country that benefited greatly during the first Trump administration when the first trade war, so to speak, was happening between the United States of America and China. And I just want to confirm if I'm audible or not. So we'll just go to the audio because I don't want to be, yes, so I think I'm audible. Just need a confirmation there. All right. So we'll just go to the YouTube live stream and confirm it. Audible or not? Confirm if I'm audible or not. Yes, so I'm definitely audible. Sorry for that dual sound. Let's continue. So in the first Trump administration, the tariffs were largely directed at China. This led to many American companies based out of China crossing the border literally and moving many of their operations to Vietnam. Many at that time felt that if there is decoupling or flight of capital from China, that capital would naturally flow into India. That did not happen. Or it happened to a much lesser extent than what Indians, people interested in the well-being of India, would have liked it. Most of the capital, or a huge chunk of the capital, went to Vietnam. That resulted in Vietnam attracting the attention, or some may say ire, of the current Trump administration, and Vietnam has now been slapped with 46% tariffs. Again, this has been put on hold. I suppose there will be negotiations between the Vietnamese government and the American government, this time regarding trade, not regarding any actual artillery war. It's just a financial discussion. And Vietnam had 46% tariffs, which hopefully will, from the Vietnamese perspective, will definitely go down. Now, this is very important. If tariffs, when introduced on a country, is damaging that country, then that definitely is an argument in favor of the fact that tariffs do damage a different country also. I have read this argument or this line of thinking repeatedly in American newspapers, that tariffs primarily damage the domestic consumers. That is, tariffs introduced on imports from foreign countries make goods more expensive to buy for the American consumers in America. What's the harm in that from the point of view of a Vietnamese company exporting goods to America? If Vietnamese goods are now subject to 46% tariffs, and just for simplicity's sake the price of those goods increases by 46%, then the profit for the Vietnamese company will also increase by 46%. What is the problem with what complaint can a Vietnamese company have? The complaint should only be from the American consumer side. Except when the Vietnamese goods become that expensive, that much more expensive than it previously was, American consumers may stop buying those goods and move to different products made in different parts of the world, or locally made in the United States of America itself, which is the reason why tariffs are introduced, to promote domestic manufacturing. Now we'll look at it in greater detail. We'll look at it from the point of view of an individual, then we'll look at it from the point of view of a society, or you can say a community based out of a single city or a single village. Then we can broaden the scope to a state level and then go all the way to a country. But let's go through the list quickly and then we'll come back to this point. Taiwan got tariffs of 32%, Japan got 24%, India got 26%, South Korea 25%, Thailand 36%, Switzerland 31%, Indonesia 32%, Malaysia 24%, Cambodia 49%, United Kingdom 10%, South Africa 30%, Brazil 10%, Bangladesh 37%, Singapore 10%, Israel 17%, Philippines 17%, Chile 10%, Australia 10%, I believe there are more, Pakistan 29%, India 26%, Pakistan 29%, Turkey 10%, Sri Lanka 44%. That's probably the highest in the Indian subcontinent. Colombia 10%, Peru 10%, Nicaragua 18%, Norway 15%, Costa Rica 10%, Jordan 20%, Dominican Republic 10%, UAE 10%, New Zealand 10%, Argentina 10%, Ecuador 10%, Guatemala 10%, Honduras 10%, Madagascar 47%, Myanmar 44%, Tunisia 28%, Kazakhstan 27%, Serbia 37%, Egypt 10%, Saudi Arabia 10%, El Salvador 10%, Cote d'Ivoire, that is Ivory Coast, 21%, Laos 48%, Botswana 37%, Trinidad and Tobago 10%, Morocco 10%, Algeria 30%, Oman 10%, Uruguay 10%, Bahamas 10%, Lesotho 50%. I think so far the highest is Lesotho. Ukraine 10%, Bahrain 10%, Qatar 10%, Mauritius 40%, Fiji 32%, Iceland 10%, Kenya 10%, Liechtenstein, my favorite country in Europe, 37%, Guyana 38%, Haiti 10%, Bosnia and Herzegovina 35%, Nigeria 14%, Namibia 21%, Brunei 24%, Bolivia 10%, Panama 10%, Venezuela 15%, North Macedonia 33%, Ethiopia 10%, Ghana 10%. We are not done yet. Moldova 31%, Angola 32%, Democratic Republic of the Congo 11%, Jamaica 10%, Mozambique 16%, Paraguay 10%, Zambia 17%, Lebanon 10%, Tanzania 10%, Iraq 39%, Georgia 10%, Senegal 10%, Azerbaijan 10%, Cameroon 11%, Uganda 10%, Albania 10%, Armenia 10%, Nepal 10%. Nepal has the least tariffs in the subcontinent, I think. Saint Martin 10%, Falkland Islands 41%. I did not even know Falkland Islands was an independent country, so that's something I learned here. Gabon 10%, Kuwait 10%, Togo 10%, Suriname 10%, Belize 10%, Papua New Guinea 10%, Malawi 17%, Liberia 10%. Liberia is a country I am familiar with because many footballers from Liberia came to play football in Kolkata, in the famous football clubs of Kolkata. British Virgin Islands 10%, Afghanistan 10%, Zimbabwe 18%, Benin 10%, Barbados 10%, Monaco 10%, Syria 41%. How much trade is America having with Syria? 41%. Uzbekistan 10%, Republic of the Congo 10%, not to be confused with Democratic Republic of Congo, there are two Congos. Djibouti 10%, French Polynesia 10%, Cayman Islands 10%, Kosovo 10%, Curacao 10%, I have never heard of this country, Curacao. Vanuatu, I have heard of this country, 22%. I used to go through a list of countries during COVID to understand which country was doing well in the fight against COVID. So I'm familiar with many names, but Curacao is a country I have not heard of. Sorry for my viewers from Curacao. Vanuatu 22%, Rwanda 10%, Sierra Leone 10%. Actually, Sierra Leone is the right way, Sierra Leone, I don't know why I called it that. Mongolia 10%, San Marino 10%, Antigua and Barbuda 10%, Bermuda 10%, Eswatini, also known as Swaziland, 10%. We still haven't reached the end. Marshall Islands 10%, St. Pierre and Miquelon 50%, so that's tied number one with Lesotho 50%. St. Kitts and Nevis 10%, Turkmenistan 10%, Grenada 10%, Sudan 10%, Turks and Caicos Islands, again a new country I've heard of, 10%, Aruba 10%, Montenegro 10%, St. Helena 10%, St. Helena, a famous Napoleon fame, 10%, Kyrgyzstan 10%, Yemen 10%, St. Vincent and the Grenadines 10%, Niger 10%, St. Lucia 10%, Nauru 30%, Equatorial Guinea 13%, Iran 10%. Okay, so Iraq has got more tariffs than Iran. Libya 31%, Samoa 10%, Guinea 10%, Timor-Leste 10%, Montserrat 10%, Chad 13%, Mali 10%. We are still not done yet. Maldives 10%, Tajikistan 10%, Cabo Verde 10%, Burundi 10%, Guadeloupe 10%, Bhutan 10%, Martinique 10%, Tonga 10%, Mauritania 10%, Dominica 10%, Micronesia 10%, Gambia 10%, French Guiana 10%, Christmas Island 10%, Andorra 10%, Central African Republic 10%, Solomon Islands 10%, Mayotte 10%, Anguilla 10%, Coco or Keeling Islands 10%, Eritrea 10%, Cook Islands 10%, South Sudan 10%, Comoros 10%, Kiribati 10%. And the final page, we only have about 9 more countries to go. Sao Tome and Principe 10%, Norfolk Island 29%, Gibraltar 10%, Tuvalu 10%, British Indian Ocean Territory 10%, Tokelau 10%, Guinea-Bissau 10%, Svalbard and Jan Mayen 10%, Heard and McDonald Islands, it's almost like a made up name, Heard and McDonald Islands 10%, and Reunion, who knows what that is, 37%. So that's the list. Now let's understand first, let's ask ourselves, what do you mean by the word tariff? Tariff is a 6-letter word, T-A-R-I-F-F, and President Donald Trump has described tariff as the most beautiful word in the English dictionary according to him. Why? Tariff, essentially, from what I have read about in newspapers, I am not an economist, I am not a finance expert, all I have learned is from media reports and from other YouTube channels. So what I've understood about tariff is that tariff is a tax on imports. So if a country like the United States of America, which is extremely rich, the standard of living of Americans is much higher than many parts of the world. It is certainly the largest economy in the world. It is one of the highest per capita GDP in the world. That is the income of every citizen of America or every person living in America is a lot, and it is more than most countries in the world. I believe it is only dwarfed by micronations, city-states, like countries where a single city is also an entire country, like Monaco, Singapore. So, largely speaking, America is a very prosperous country in terms of the standard of living of the residents. In fact, even people emigrating to America from countries like India, Pakistan, other parts of the world, they largely go to America in the hope of living a better life. That may be in terms of peace, if they are trying to escape a war-torn country, but it is certainly also in the hope of prosperity. So a country like America, which is extremely rich, also consumes a lot when it comes to services, when it comes to goods. So because the purchasing power of an American consumer is a lot, countries from all over the world want to sell their goods to America. Case in point, I am recording this video on YouTube, which is an American service. I am using it. I don't know if the American consumers are are the reason why the American businesses are successful, or American businesses are the cause for American consumers being so pro-consumption. I don't know. But it is true that the American businesses that do exist, that are successful, they are used the world over. You think about the device you are watching this video on. If you're using an iPhone, you're using an American product. You're certainly watching it on YouTube, which is an American product owned by an American company, Alphabet, which originally was called Google. Now it is called Alphabet, but it is YouTube. Anyway, so what are tariffs? Let's come back to tariffs. So an American consumer wants to buy a product, say a pencil, and this pencil is made in China. Okay, so a company that sells that pencil will import that pencil from China and sell it to an American consumer. Say the price of this pencil is, for simplicity's sake, $100. Alright, just for an example. So the American consumer is paying $100 to buy a pencil sold by an American company but imported from China. Now the American government introduces 25% tariffs. I'm just using hypothetical figures to explain. Tariffs by definition, as I said, is a tax on imports, and taxes can only be introduced by governments. In this case, the American government introduces a 25% tariff. What happens to the price of the pencil? It's not so easy. When you impose, when the government, American government imposes the tariff, that tariff should be paid to the American government, but who pays it? It is not the Chinese government that pays this tariff to the American government. It is not the Chinese company exporting the pencil from China to America that pays the tariff. It is the American company that is importing the pencil from China at the point of entry. American company pays this 25% to the American government. Now, if the American company importing it pays the tariff to the American government and does not change the price at which it was selling the pencil, what happens? Its profit margin shrinks. Now, if it already had a fat profit margin, say the pencil cost him $1 to import and he was selling it at $100, making $99 profit for each pencil sold, then he might be willing to accept the hit of 25% tariffs. In that situation, the tariff does not increase the price of the pencil to the consumer. It does shrink the profit margin of the American importer, but it does not cause any change to be felt by the end user, the consumer who is buying the pencil. However, if the profit margin is significantly shrunk due to the tariff, if the American importer feels that it is a threat to not pass on the added cost to the consumer, then the cost is passed on to the consumer, and what happens? The pencil becomes more expensive. This is an argument that many people have loudly pointed out on YouTube as well as in many media reports, that tariffs can lead to higher prices. Now, United States of America recently had a presidential election in November of 2024. An election, I must say, I predicted very early on, and I predicted it accurately. There is a video on my channel, I think it's from July. I probably add a link to it in the description below, where I correctly predicted that Donald Trump is going to win the presidential elections. Many American pundits, like political pundits, like Cenk Uyghur from the Young Turks or Nate Silver from 538, these are people who are constantly watching American politics. They are earning their livelihood from watching American politics. They refuse to call the election. They say it's too close to call. Alan Lichtman, the professor from the American University, who has correctly predicted every presidential election from the 80s, got this prediction woefully wrong. He said that Kamala Harris would win. And till the last day, till the day the election results were released, he was live streaming with his son. And it was honestly sad to watch him come to terms with the fact that he had got his prediction wrong, which he had got so many elections correct, including the first Trump victory. But it was slightly sad to watch him realize that he had got it horribly wrong. I didn't. I got it right. So, what was I saying? I lost my train of thought. But let's come back to this. So many people who have been commenting on the tariffs being introduced by President Trump have said that this will increase the prices of goods in America. And President Trump was largely voted into office. One of the main political issues that really helped President Trump win the presidential election was the issue of increased grocery prices, increased prices across the board, inflation basically. American consumers do not want, and no consumers anywhere in the world will want to pay higher prices. You know, if you increase the price of petrol, then the government in power will have to pay a price at the ballot box. Isn't that the case? So, this was the warning that was issued by many people, even people from the so-called conservative side. newspapers like Wall Street Journal have been constantly issuing warnings regarding the adverse impact the tariffs can have on prices of goods. So, like I said, tariffs are taxes on imports. So, if the government is introducing new taxes on imports, the importer, the company importing those goods, is having to pay those prices which were not originally there. So, their profit margin is shrinking, and if they want to maintain their profit margin, they have to pass on the cost to the consumers. So, the company has only two choices: either live with a decreased profit margin or pass on the cost to the consumer. Now, in certain situations, passing on the cost to the consumer is not possible. What if the cost becomes prohibitively expensive and the company goes out of business? In that case, the company is left with one choice only: manufacture that pencil domestically. If you manufacture the pencil domestically, then you would not have to pay the tariff. But why is the company not manufacturing the pencil in the USA? Because cost of manufacture in the cheaper labor is available in China. I don't know if the labor is as cheap in China as we would like to believe it to be. Maybe it is, who knows. But I watched an interview with Apple CEO Tim Cook, who said that cheap labor in China is a thing of the past. It no longer exists. That may not be true. Maybe he was deliberately being disingenuous, but that's what he said on record in an interview which you can easily find on YouTube. So if the cost of labor is not the factor, then probably the availability of skilled labor is why many goods are not produced in the United States of America. Now, this is something which is deeply insulting to many people in America. They feel, as they should, that Americans are quite capable of producing every good that they are importing. Everything that is imported into the US can be produced in the US. This is largely the thinking that is driving the tariffs. So the aim of the people who are supporters of tariffs is to ensure that the goods get produced in America, so that it boosts manufacturing in America, it creates job growth, it helps both the American businesses and American workers, it helps American society at large. How do I explain this? It's largely like the Atmanirbhar Bharat campaign, where if you produce everything that you need within your country, then you don't have to depend on the geopolitical tensions or logistical nightmares or the supply chain issues that were largely exposed during the pandemic. When the borders shut down, it was very difficult to import goods. I remember watching a Barkha Dutt interview in the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic, where she found out, to her horror I suppose, that N95 masks, those are not widely available in India. It became available. Indian industry really did do a remarkable job, but when the initial wave hit in March of 2020, N95 masks in India was not really widely available. So she said that why don't we import it? But where do you import it from? The country you're going to import it from also needs it, which really creates the need to be Atmanirbhar or self-sufficient. So now let's look at this from the point of view of an individual. If I want to be self-sufficient, how self-sufficient am I? Am I responsible for this live stream completely? No, I'm not. Yes, the laptop is mine, the webcam is mine. I have a few devices around me which is taking care of whether I am properly live or not. However, the internet provider that I have paid for is using spectrum provided by the government. The electricity that is there in this room may go away at any moment, which is not under my control. So there are always external factors at play. An individual cannot be self-sufficient. Fair enough, you might say. Also, every need that I have cannot be satisfied by myself. If today I need to go to a doctor, I will be paying him something, he will not be paying me back anything. So I will be having a trade deficit of sorts with the doctor, because I got a service from him, I paid him money, I paid him his consultation fees. He got money. I got the service. I now have a deficit of sorts with him. I didn't get any money back. I only got the service. So does that mean now I impose tariff on the doctor? It might sound outlandish, but stay with me. So you might think at an individual level, this is impossible to be completely self-sufficient. It is possible at a community level. Let's have a community living in one city perhaps, or one part of a city, and that part of the city will have doctors, dentists, I don't want to get into that debate. Doctors, dentists, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, engineers, every trade you can think of, and they trade within the same community. So the wealth generated, the goods and services generated within that community are used by the people in that community, and when it is sufficiently efficient and everybody in that community is living life in a very comfortable manner and there is surplus of goods and services, why not let other people also enjoy the same goods and services? That way this community becomes richer by exporting those goods. Now you go to a different community and say, okay, so your standard of living is not that high. Why don't you allow us to give you these services? Just give us some money for it and you'll be able to enjoy it. You don't have to bother learning how to build a platform like YouTube. You can just enjoy it. I'm using YouTube as an example. Please don't get mad. So this community now enjoys it. They are paying this. Sometimes the product is free, like YouTube is free, but of course there are methods in which YouTube is also making money. So what happens when a certain community is doing well and their standard of living is good? Then their products start going to other countries. There is a counter argument to this also. If a community wants to become prosperous, then they should focus on exports also while protecting their industry. So I recently came across a video where somebody said that every country that has become prosperous by protecting their domestic industry till the point that it became so competitive that it could export its goods and services to a different country, and then they wanted that country where they were exporting their goods and services to not have any protection. Am I making sense? For example, let's talk about the United States of America. In the 19th century, United States of America was becoming wealthy and it was about to become the wealthiest nation in the world, overtaking United Kingdom. At that time, American industry had protections. Domestic industry in America was protected till the time they became so competent that they became the wealthiest country in the world. Then they started exporting their goods. The global trading system that exists today is largely designed by American businesses at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. The World Trade Organization, the free trade arrangements, these are all American ideals, capitalist ideals. So what America wants right now is that America wants to sell its products to every other country in the world. It wants access to markets in every other country of the world. And if the argument is not without merit, people who are saying that it is a stupid thing to say are not presidents of the United States of America. A person cannot be both stupid and president of the United States of America. That argument does not hold water in my mind. You cannot be both. So the American argument, the Trumpian argument is that if Japan can sell cars to the US easily, then the US should also be able to sell cars to Japan easily. There should not be any government barriers, government introduced trade barriers. Just remove all the barriers and let the industries compete with each other. Let the American industry compete with the Japanese industry. Why do trade barriers exist then? Because Japan was devastated after the Second World War. It needed to build its industry up, so it had trade barriers when it came to imports. It wanted to protect its domestic industry. then its domestic industry develops, it becomes self-sufficient, it sells to consumers in Japan, and then it starts wanting to export to other rich countries like America. So protect an economy till the time it becomes rich. Once it becomes rich, then you start exporting. You can still keep the domestic protections in place, which probably has happened in Japan. I'm not very certain, but I've watched enough videos to see suggestions made to that effect. So Japanese car companies had their interests protected by the Japanese government, and then Japanese car companies like Toyota, Honda start exporting cars to US. What happens? The United States car companies like General Motors, Ford, Jeep, I forget the other name for that, Chrysler I think it was called, now it is called Stellantis, they are not as good in the American consumer sees that the Japanese cars are better for their needs than the American cars, so the American consumer starts buying Japanese cars. What does the American auto industry do? Do they start making better cars? No, they start blaming the Japanese government for the tariffs, for the trade practices, for the inability of American cars to penetrate the Japanese market. American car industry is not blaming themselves for not being able to make cars that cater to Japanese needs. And this has happened with every country, and especially with China in the modern era. When the Chinese goods are flooding into America at cheaper rates, Americans are not able to flood the Chinese market. But I want a question answered here. I want to ask the Americans this, that when you think about iPhones being $1,000 when they are imported from China, and if you introduce tariffs, then the iPhones logically would become more expensive. But when you think about manufacturing iPhones completely in the US, then also the cost becomes more expensive, not just because cost of labor in America is higher, but because the supply chain is based out of China and other parts of Asia. If you want to move the entire supply chain to the United States of America, then you would have done so in the beginning. You wouldn't want to import products from halfway around the globe, assemble it in California, design it in California, then get the product from China if you could manufacture it cheaply in the United States of America. It is just not possible. And many American politicians, including Barack Obama, have reportedly tried to ensure that iPhones could be built in America. It just wasn't possible according to the media reports I came across. However, whether these are true or not, my point is simple. Even if iPhones become more expensive by manufacturing them in China, are the American consumers ready to pay that increased price? And my question is, why not? Pay the increased price. You are richer than almost every other resident of every other country. Pay that increase. If you are richer, you can afford to pay higher prices. Is it not? Maybe not. Maybe the reason why Americans are richer is because they can still buy stuff at cheaper rates, although not as cheap as other parts of the world. But nobody, even if you are extremely rich, nobody wants to pay 3 times the price that they are used to paying. If you are paying $1,000 for iPhone, you don't want to pay $3,000 for the same iPhone, even if you are an American citizen. So that's really the debate now. Even people who are in favor of tariffs, and there are many who are in favor of tariffs in America, they don't want the prices to increase. They want the unfair trade practices, what they perceive to be unfair, they want that to be reduced, but they don't want the prices to be increased for goods. Now, what are the Democrats trying to gain from this? They are trying to point at the fact that this is not the way to solve the problem. This is not the way to solve the unfair trade practices that are existing all over the world. All it will do is result in inflation, increased prices, and it will hurt the American consumer. And they are trying to blame the Republicans in general and President Donald Trump in particular for this mess. They have also highlighted an interesting point that the markets have really tanked. When the announcement was made, the markets went down. I don't understand the financial markets that well, but I feel if the markets have gone down, that doesn't mean somebody has lost money. Yes, at that point in time, their assets have depreciated, but as long as you have not sold your assets, you have not made it permanent. You can wait for it to rise again. Sometimes it takes years to rise. So I understand the problem with market volatility, but I don't think it's as big a problem as it was made out to be. Also, another thing I really found interesting is the term bond market vigilante. This is a term I had read in the New York Times, in one of the articles in New York Times, I think in January, just after the inauguration, just before the inauguration of President Trump. This was way before the tariffs were introduced, and somebody wrote in the opinion pages of the New York Times that bond market or Wall Street will decide or is the only force that can really act as a check against President Trump, especially the bond market. So what happens in bond market is, what is bond? Bond is basically IOU, and usually bonds are issued by very reliable entities like sovereign governments. In this case, let's talk about the United States government. United States issues treasury bonds. Treasury bonds. Some of them have 10-year yields. So maybe you buy. It can be another government. It can be a company. It can be an individual. But let's think about it as, say, the Chinese government. The Chinese government buys a treasury bond from the United States of America for $100. All right, and the promise is that 10 years later, America is getting the $100 from China. It's selling a bond to the Chinese government. 10 years later, America will pay $125 to China. That's the reason why China bought it, because whenever you are buying something long term, you want to buy it from a reliable entity, from an entity that at the very least will still exist 10 years later. Certainly a sovereign government like the United States of America will exist 10 years down the line. So buying a 10-year bond, getting money 10 years later is not that big a deal. And usually bonds are bought when people want to avoid volatility, when people want to get into reliable investment. It's much more reliable, popularly regarded as much more reliable than stock market investment. So if the stock market goes into volatile territory, usually people start buying more bonds and putting their money into bonds. That did not happen in this case. As per some media reports that I watched, I think a BBC report I watched recently, today itself, said that the bond market was different. This time the US treasuries were not being bought. Or maybe they were being sold, because many of those treasury bonds are held by other governments which were at the receiving end of high tariffs. So suppose the American government introduces high tariffs on the Chinese government, and the Chinese government at one point, I believe, and I'm pretty sure the number is still correct, holds almost 600 billion American dollars worth of bonds. Might be more. Don't quote me on that figure, but it's a huge sum. So if the Chinese government perceives that the American government is acting in bad faith, according to the Chinese government, they can sell those bonds. If they sell those bonds, the American government has to pay that money to the Chinese government. So it is a tricky affair. So what I'm trying to say is that bond market has immense power to dictate the moves of a government, because bond is something you buy from the government. You give money to the government. That money is used by the government for various purposes, for infrastructure development purposes, for welfare purposes, for military spending. But there are only two ways that a government can make money. One is through taxation, and the other is through borrowing. Borrowing is by selling bonds. Now taxation is only up to a certain level. In most democratically elected governments, you can't just keep raising taxes and get away with it. People will not like it. And people, if they don't like your policies, they'll vote you out of office. In most democracies, this is what happens. When people feel that their pocketbook is hurting, they vote the politicians in office out of office, and they elect somebody else to do a better job. If they fail, then they are also voted out. A very pertinent example of this is Liz Truss from the United Kingdom, who was voted out or was asked to leave the office only 44 days after assuming the office of Prime Minister in the United Kingdom. So taxation cannot be increased beyond a certain point. Borrowing can be done as much as possible as long as somebody is willing to lend money to you. The way governments tend to borrow money is by issuing bonds. And if you have got that money by issuing bonds and now are spending that money on something that you want to spend the money on, and you know that 10 years later I'll have to pay that government or that entity whatever I owe that person, and suddenly you realize that this entity is wanting the money now because they want to sell their bonds, then that creates a problem, very understandable financial problem for the government. So bond market activities really dictate the activities of the government, and so the bond market people are called, or bond market entities are called, bond market vigilantes, people who are not working inside the government but are really exercising a lot of control on activities that should essentially be under government control. James Carville, I believe, was the political advisor to Bill Clinton, and he famously claimed in the 90s that he wants to be reincarnated as a bond market vigilante because the bond market vigilantes can intimidate anyone, even the President of the United States of America. So that is an argument that people have said. That is why the tariffs were paused. I don't know if that is true or not, but that is one thing that people have said. Alright. So that is what I had to say, but now as things stand, the tariffs have been paused and the focus has largely shifted to China with 125% tariffs. The American president has said that China has disrespected America. It's just a lot of, it seems like a lot of propaganda in my opinion, but who knows what's going to happen. I believe I've been able to throw some light on the tariff situation. If you want to know more, then leave a comment and we can talk about it in more detail in the next video. Thank you for watching. In my opinion, I feel that tariffs should be used. As I said, many countries have become successful by using tariffs, by protecting their domestic economy. Even countries like India want to protect their domestic economy, want to lay out incentives to have manufacturing within the country. So tariffs definitely have a role. They should be used by the government to promote the development of industry within the country. However, it has to be used judiciously. That's the only thing I have to say about tariffs. I don't think the American president is not thinking intelligently. That is a very, very dumb thing for people to say. Certainly people on YouTube should not be calling the American president unintelligent. That is not possible. You cannot, just to reiterate something I said earlier in this live stream, you cannot both be dumb and the American president. By definition, if you have become president of the United States of America, you must possess above average intelligent quotient, which President Trump definitely possesses. So he knows what he's doing. There is no doubt about that. And let's see how this plays out. And if you like this video, let me know in the comment section. I can make another video about this if you liked it. Thank you for watching this, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.